Hello, perceptive reader. This is a James Poeartistry consultant moment, but this actually deals with encouragement that I want to give you. Uh, you know, I was sleeping so good tonight. I was having dreams and everything else. I mean, good dreams. And then I was abruptly awakened, but we won't go into that. What I'm still going to share with you, though, for a bit of encouragement, because I want you to know this, and it gives you an additional hope for the future. Okay, here it is. The thought came to my mind tonight about the humility of the church. Now, when I say the humility of the church, I don't mean that the church is gullible. I don't mean that the church is naive or anything of that nature. See, humility will make you look all those type of ways to people who are viewing their own higher education, you see, in particular ways. And I'm going to get specific with one of them. And I'm going to tell you, with all due respect, the field does a lot of good. And yet, um, some other techniques and methods that are used still fall right in line with, you know, medical practices of choice and conscience. And so they shouldn't be forced on anybody. It gets into really, once again, stripping somebody of their own constitutional and civil rights and things of that nature. It's amazing how when certain people want to try experiments at times, they are actually breaking laws, but be feeling comfortable about it, all because it's under the guise of some type of labeled experiment. And that still doesn't make it right. I'm going to tell you that. Just read my uh, podcast that dealt with the Tuskegee medical experiments, which I always reference. Anyway, the humility of the church. See, that's what I mean. The members of the church, and especially the deacons on up, so to speak, they realize that with all that great authority that they have, even from God, they have a humility towards Him, especially after reading Romans and a letter of Hebrews, to still really realize the limitation of the church at this time to do certain things, which involves what medical practices and things of the nature of conscience. And so uh, there's another humility in the way um, that they help persons. There's actually been individuals uh, who have received the water of God's word, the comfort of God's word, all done through well trained shepherds. See, even in the Christian congregation, this is what I mean. Well trained shepherds that even realize what Jesus was doing when He was likening His people to sheep. He was just saying, you know, your sheep are going to be with you. Sheep have to be fed, you see, on a regular basis. And that's what they were to do. So um, if a sheep fell into a pit or what have you, even on the Sabbath day, when everybody's saying that they, shouldn't be working or what have you, no, you would go and get that sheep and pull that sheep out the pit or what have you. So with that being said, there's been people who have gained a lot of help, spiritual help and material help, um, in the congregation of God. And there were traumatic events that many persons have gone through. And it wasn't until they started reading the Bible and receiving shepherding care that they were learning how to manage the pain and trauma through their life. At one time where they might have been, you know, doing all sorts of things and resorting to, crutches, etc., to get by. You see what I'm saying? From the pain that they were suffering from a young age, the church, the humility of the church, helped them to deal with it. And you hear me mention about persons compartmentalizing their different pain and trauma. And for some, especially ones like veterans, guess what? They can compartmentalize it and take it with them even to the grave. Now, what I mean by that is that they really are able to function, and thanks to the spiritual strength that they continue to, reinforce, read spiritual books, do affirmations. It works, and in some cases, that's all you can really do and hope for. And it's nothing wrong with that. It's nothing wrong with that at all. Now, I'm sharing that with you because there are times, and see, and this is why I mentioned about sucking opinions. There are times where all of a sudden, persons who were doing okay, quite okay for some years, uh, through their association or conversations that they're having with different persons, the next thing you know, the type of trauma that they may have had as a child, or or even recent years. But I'm talking about a lot of stuff that, remember I say, good people do bad things at times, and a lot of that is still linked to childhood. You don't even have to have any type of abusive parent to receive trauma. The trauma actually still comes from the child's peers at times growing up. When you see those coming of age movies and things of the nature, times, let me tell you, some of that stuff that even those young people, those young teenagers do to one another, it's like it's traumatic. It's on the level of being on a battlefield, but it's all what? Mental. But see, it's not always all mental. It's often, even in high school, it's mental and physically, because, you fight, sometimes physically fight. Well, with that being said, the church have helped many of persons who've been through that type of humiliation and peer pressure and things of that nature. And so there are still times persons who have gotten a nice spiritual grip, that's the word I'm going to use, on the matter, then sometimes want to seek extra help, and that is certainly their choice. But did you know that some shepherds would still make sure, when an individual want to go for maybe additional help like therapy and things of that nature, that they tell them, still make sure you don't use methods that will cause you to lose your soundness of mind. Some of those same vices, so to speak, that persons dealt with, you see, the trauma when they were younger, and that they no longer use. Some of these same methods, depending on what type of therapist you run into, depending on what type of prescription that they give you, will actually be having some of the same effects that you was just getting from this straight form of narcotic. That's all I'm going to say. It's just that it's in a different way. And so that's one of the warnings that the shepherds will give. But then there are also other methods as well that we call can be opening up your mind. And that opening of your mind can have all sorts of effects on it. And especially if a person's really are not as well trained in certain areas, you see. And there again are certain methods as well. You got to really know a person a lot over time in order to go there. And sometimes persons may already want to make suggestions to do this or do that way before an individual is even to that point. All the same, there are still just certain types of medical treatments where it is strongly mentioned that you do something like this, make sure you pray. And you pray before every time. And hopefully doing those type of prayers, hopefully the person will heal a lot quicker, you know. But I still wanted to use that example as the humility of the church, because what it boils down to, and this is what I mean by that, is the caretakers and administrators and stuff of the church realize there are still just certain areas that they still have to leave to God. When it comes to the sheep and the sheep choice, there are just certain areas of life that, you know, they are not to be overbearing in at all, because of the examples that I just gave you. And that shows humility. Another thing that has happened is I think about God and what has hurt his heart over the years. And I mean, I've really been able to see this, that when people even are having mental illness, you see, there have been times and where a person was dealing with this type of mental illness or what have you. And it may not have even been mental illness. It could have been, again, the type of pressures that life was actually putting upon the person, and they weren't receiving the help from nowhere. And it was really, you know, it stressed them out. It stressed them out. And so eventually that pressure just caused them to do something that they wouldn't have done otherwise, and that they weren't even thinking about, but it finally got to them. See, that's like a form of spiritual torture. So what I'm sharing with you on this is there's a reason why in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus talks about his sheep purposely having stumbling blocks thrown before them. Jesus said you're not supposed to do that. See, and yet there's many methods and techniques in the world that persons do that as a practice. And because they went through it, they like to think, or fool themselves, that just because they went through it, then they have the right to put somebody else through that same type of method or technique. And they don't. But they do it, but they don't. They're not supposed to. And that's why Jesus warns against that you hurt his sheep in that way on purpose. That is not pleasing to God at all. And that's what some of these experiments have done. That's what the Tuskegee experiment, medical experiments have shown. I keep saying that is something that the God in heaven would have never approved, with what those men and women went through, those families went through. I can guarantee you that. Look at me trying to say, nobody can always say 100%, but I can guarantee you on that I know God wouldn't approve those type of experiments. And there are actually experiments like that today being done on all sorts of people. They don't even know it. And this is why I say, if all of a sudden somebody react adversely, we still shouldn't be uh, pushed to judgment in a harsh way, depending on the situation. If you really do know what persons were purposely put through, that was on the form of physically, mental, emotional, and spiritual torture. And then if the person does crack, you want to say, shame on them? No, shame on you for being so insensitive or not compassionate at all to know when you were supposed to say when, or to at least know that this is just unethical. But I keep saying the humility of the church continues to at least give encouragement, even though they know somebody might be going through this or that. But this is what I want to mention again, that those actions at times when persons got to the point where they were just losing control of themselves, sad to say, even some of those persons were expelled out the congregations at times because their actions, they couldn't stop doing whatever it is they were doing. You see, that God said that they wouldn't inherit God's kingdom. And so the church just had to leave it towards, God to still handle it the rest of the way as they protect God's congregation, kept God's congregation clean, you see, as they call it. Even though this is one thing that I am going to say, it's still obvious in these days that we live in now, there's a very unique situation that's requiring even more patience with that. Because Satan certainly is, I keep emphasizing, is trying to frame many people to look in ways that they're not, in hopes of ostracizing them. And it has happened for some. And I say again, for some of the ones who then went into depression and they're just a shell of their former self, I say again, shame on the ones who did it. Shame on the demonic forces who did it. And you need to understand about where it talks about in Ephesians about we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but principalities and things of that nature. Well, you know what? If you make yourself a willing hand and puppet of those principalities, then you know something, you're still part of the problem anyway. Just like as some persons were saying, people can do whatever they want to do. But I told you, we don't have the right to go around physically assaulting people, torturing them in that way, sabotaging their finances. And then after a person has gone through all that hell, that just goes to show you how lack of compassion and empathy people have. They can know that somebody even gone into financial destitution, and it wasn't because they were trying to do corrupt business practices at all. No, it was like because they were trying to do honest business practices that the corrupt people caused them to go into financial destitution. And then to still not have some type of, I want to use the word safety net, so that once you realize that this person, there comes a point where you got to stop saying this person need to keep doing. No, you in your compassion, you give the gift. That's what you do. Speaking with some type of knowledge of the two greatest commandments. Everything doesn't have to be like some measuring line, meticulous in that way, this way or that way, saying this is when you do that, you're wrong in doing that. You sound more like a Pharisee or Sadducee. And what did Jesus say? If your righteousness don't go any further than them, then you won't go into the kingdom of heavens. What I am telling you is sometimes, no, you just give the gift. Monetary, you give it. Take care of Perceptive Reader. Know that in the new world, these things will be implemented more fully in a loving degree.